And Renee. All right. Oh, actually, I'll give this to you in a second. We got a little worksheet here. I was debating whether I was going to grade it or not. We'll see. See how I feel in about 5 minutes. All right. So the water cycle. Let's talk about that very quickly. I'm going to review water, carbon, nitrogen, finish talking about phosphorus, and then move on. So the water cycle. What's a major reservoir or source of water?
Ocean.
The ocean. Good. What else? What are the other sources? Lakes, ponds, where else? It's much smaller, maybe. Good. There's a lot of water in the ice caps, but not usable, right? In the water cycle. Okay, where else? I don't know if anyone said it.
The atmosphere?
Yeah, there's water vapor there, yep, but... Yep, you guys all said that. Where else? Unless somebody missed it. Underground. Did anyone say that?
Yeah.
Groundwater? Yeah, if you said it, sorry. All right, lights, please. So, what's a major water like sink? In other words, who uses water? Humans, plants, right? Animals. Okay. So I know. I wish that was much brighter. I wonder if the bulb's starting to go. I feel like it was brighter. So, you feel comfortable with this cycle? It's not too bad. Right, not a lot going on with this compared to the other ones. Just understand where water sources are, what the sinks are, meaning what uses the water, and then how it cycles through the environment. Evaporates, precipitates, come back, and it kind of keeps doing it. And just remember, transpiration is what? When water evaporates from leaves because the plants are doing photosynthesis, right? Okay, all right. Okay, the carbon cycle, we kind of did a little quick activity last week with it because Caitlin likes using the whiteboards, but it was good. It was very, very productive. Where are the major sources of carbon? Like where's carbon coming from in this cycle? All right, they're stored in fossil fuels for a short time or a long time? Long. Could be millions of years unless we extract it and then burn it, combustion. Where else does carbon come from?
Plants?
Respiration, good, from plants, good. Where else? The ocean and the atmosphere exchange it, right? Ocean acidification is a problem because we are pumping so much CO2 into the atmosphere from burning fossil fuels. That exchange is going kind of the wrong, it's getting out of steady state, right? So we're pumping too much CO2 into the atmosphere, so that exchange isn't balanced anymore. Too much CO2 in the water creates carbonic acid, which kills the coral, essentially, bleaches them. All right, what else? Any other sources of carbon? Volcanoes. This is a volcano row here. You guys like volcanoes? Yeah, forest fires. And then how does it get back into the earth or the water, right? We talk about the exchange. Photosynthesis takes it out. Decomposers put it back in as well. So as long as, again, with the deal with these cycles is understanding how it's essentially kind of going up into the atmosphere or out of the organism or earth and then back in, right? So that's hence the cycle. So just as long as you know, oh, and I forgot sedimentation, right? That's another one where it's stored. So sedimentation of fossil fuels is stored fairly long time. In the ocean, it's fairly quick. In organisms, it's still a long time, but not compared to fossil fuels, right? So when something dies or with the process of respiration or photosynthesis. So just have a good understanding that the time frame is different and how fast it would be cycled through. The sedimentation of fossil fuels is definitely the slowest, right? Nitrogen. So the nitrogen cycle, you have your different parts, and I know they kind of, I think, added one here, but you got nitrogen fixation. That's the first step, where your gas in the atmosphere is converted into usable nitrogen. Well, this kind of happens together, sort of. As soon as this nitrogen goes into the ground as ammonia, it's converted into NH4+, NO2-, NO3-, which are water soluble, which plants can use. That's then the next part. So the plants take those ions and assimilate it. And then the process of the decomposers, we talked about that. Then your ammonification is another process with decomposers that break down organics. Once the plants die, it converts it back into usable nitrogen for the plants and other organisms, and then the denitrification gets the N2 back because it converts NO3 minus into nitrous oxide and eventually nitrogen gas, which goes into the atmosphere. So I just kind of want to go through those fairly quickly. What are the special bacteria that do this here? My daughter knows the name now. Cyanobacteria, right? They're pretty cool. I'm pretty fascinated with those things. They're also called blue-green algae. I don't think I said that the other day. So that's kind of cool. I think that's pretty impressive how they can do that. Sorry, one more thing. We're gonna backtrack here. What are humans doing to the water cycle? How are we hurting the water cycle? How are we altering the water cycle?
Polluting the water.
Polluting water. Good. What else? Link to that article, actually. What's the biggest thing creating loss of biodiversity? Habitat loss. The habitats aren't just ceasing to exist on their own. What are we doing? What are we doing? Clearing land for agriculture. That's a big one. All right, and then when we clear land, we get rid of trees and vegetation. How does that affect the water cycle? Increase erosion and starts with the R. Runoff, right. So the water isn't going where it used to go, let's say. Right? Let's see here. Oh, and if we're taking away vegetation, there's less, not evaporation, transpiration, right? Okay, good. And besides agriculture, here, I'll give you one of them. So besides using water for irrigation and like industrial uses, we're using it. You got to come up with the third one. So irrigation for agriculture, let's say. Industries use tons of water for whatever they're making. Something else. Yeah, but that's for natural gas. What else do we use water for? Drinking. Right. We have to drink. So irrigation, for the crops, but also rerouting water maybe for animals too, and us. How are we affecting the carbon cycle? This one's easier. We're burning fossil fuels, right? They should decompose over millions of years. Instead, they're breaking down in seconds. What else? Breathing, okay? More CO2 into the environment from us. And if we're taking down all the green stuff, right, so that steady state is affected, right? Okay, good. I forgot to mention this the other day. So many little things here. Somewhere in the 1700s and mid-1800s in our country, the amount of CO2 put in the atmosphere exploded. What was that? The Industrial Revolution, right? Good. Let's see. Nitrogen. How are we affecting the nitrogen cycle? Fertilizer. Good. That's the biggest one. Also, we could take that another step further, right? So if we're clearing a lot of land, less vegetation, less organic matter, that balance between the producers and decomposers, consumers, that's getting a little disrupted as well. So that you're kind of removing some of the parts of that. All right, now phosphorus cycle. Here we go. So I just want to finish this up, and then we will move on. All right, so I forget exactly how far we got here, but there's no gaseous part to this. The phosphorus in the environment is very small amount of phosphorus that's usable because it's mostly in rocks, sediments, think of it that way. So the only way it gets exposed is when there's geological uplift and then weathering and erosion, and then that gets into the soil where plants can use it. Fertilizer is the biggest problem with human involvement here because a lot of fertilizers have phosphorus. And what state is the phosphorus usable? It's not just straight up P phosphorus. What is it? You should have wrote this down. So like ammonia, NH3 isn't very usable, but NO3 minus is. So someone just say?
PO4.
Yeah, PO4 minus 3. What's that called? phosphate ion. You guys need to know that. It's phosphate. That's where most of it's found. Let's see here. Yeah, so because there's a low level of phosphorus and we're adding a lot more, it's completely disrupting the balance of the phosphorus cycle, creating those algal blooms. And actually, Liz just sent some pictures. We'll look at those that her mom, she's cleaning up Thursday.
Yeah, the governor is like got this whole plan. I don't say something, but whole plan.
All right, well, she's involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's good because she's smart. She knows what she's doing.
She's like.
She's in charge.
Kinda.
Yeah, she's a big deal. Yeah, so that's cool. That's really, so I'll look at those pictures. But anyways, yeah, so we're adding all this phosphorus, and so a very extremely limiting nutrient, we're essentially overpowering the environment with it, creating all these problems. What do you call the young pond again? Oligotrophic, right. If too much phosphorus gets involved with that, it ends up with eutrophication, which is not always a good thing. A natural process it is, but not very quickly. And then remember, if you get too much phosphorus, too much plant life, it creates these zones. Was I talking to you guys about the dead zone in the Gulf, the size of New Jersey? No? So because the Mississippi runs right through the middle of our country essentially, and that's where most of the agriculture and fertilizer runs off into, the Gulf of Mexico, I just read this the other day. Maybe it was in that article, because I read that over the weekend. I don't know, I read so much stuff these days, I forget where I'm getting stuff from. But yeah, there's sometimes these dead zones like the size of the state of New Jersey in the Gulf. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. So that's definitely humans.
So what does that mean?
Oh, so dead zone. So oops, that means no fish, all the oxygen is gone. Because there's so much fertilizer and phosphorus primarily that there's too much, let's say, algae. You get an algal bloom, and then when that dies, the decomposers break it down, and the only way they can decompose organic matter, normal fungi and bacteria, they need oxygen. The cyanobacteria is different, but when they use up all the oxygen in the water, decomposing the organic matter becomes what's called the dead zone, so there's no life in that. And I mean, that's a massive, you know, I can say these stats, and even to me, it's like, wow, that's crazy, but if you were there and to like see the amount of water that is, it's kind of sad. Not kind of, it is. But anyways, you need to know how humans are affecting these cycles. Phosphorus is a big one with the fertilizer, the hypoxic dead zones, and the last thing I had here, detergents, both laundry and dish detergents contain phosphates, which can also add to the problem, because think of how many people are doing dishes and laundry, right? So you can get detergents that don't have those harmful phosphates and phosphorus compounds. So, you know, it makes me think twice. It's funny, I was talking to my wife over the weekend. The more I learn about this class, the more conflicted I am with being a chemistry teacher. Now, these drains go through a special limestone filtering system, and the water's contained temporarily and hopefully filtered, and it's cleaned once a year. I talked to maintenance about it. Yeah, I'm definitely going to start doing things a little different, because I don't need to use some of this stuff, like phosphates and nitrates. I don't have to. I can just do something else. So, anyways, all right, that's it. We're done with cycles. We're done with Unit 1. Questions on the cycles? You will have questions on them on the test next week. Yeah.
There was like homework on like the sulfur cycle and all that. Do we need to know anything about it?
No sulfur cycle. There it is, sulfur cycle. Okay. All right. Now let's look at. Here, let me freeze you. Let me just see my highly sensitive documents here. Let me see this email from Liz here.
It should have. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's gross.
Yeah.
That reminds me of like, I don't know, this is gonna make me sound old, but Ghostbusters, like.
That's exactly. Oh my god! So the people on my mom's team, they like took her face and put her in like Ghostbusters, and they were sending her all this stuff. It was
Yeah,
so funny.
maybe they're in my age range.
Yeah.
Ghostbusters. When I was a kid, Ghostbusters was awesome. But anyways, I mean, Have you guys all seen like the
Everyone
original
knows
ones?
Everyone knows. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and some of this stuff, you know, transcends generations.
No, we're not that.
Yeah, so that's, yeah. So right, we see a eutrophic pond. So who thought that pond at Five Rivers was eutrophic? The one that the one with all the,
It was eutrophic, she said.
yeah, okay, right. So, but was that like this? No. So I'm glad we went there. I thought that was great, and I'm glad we talked more and you heard her say some things, because this is like the unhealthy version, right? There's a natural succession of things, which we're going to get into. This is not natural. So this is when something we have done, fertilizers and other compounds that have gotten in the water, and that creates these algal blooms. They die. Water can't get through it. I mean, sunlight can't get through it, first of all. But yeah, that is
She
toxic.
said like if the dog were to swim in it and then like lick it off of its skin, it would die.
Right, and that's what I said when I went to that pine bush. She said, don't let your dogs go in. Don't let your kids go in.
Oh, this stuff, not the.
Yeah.
No.
So where is this again?
It's
What is it
Washington.
Yeah.
Washington County.
So what's it in the
It's like
water?
the Washington Lake.
That's algae.
That's
This green stuff.
it's like yeah,
But
but
it's-
it's past the point of just like plants.
It's like toxic. It's like super toxic
Because
algae.
like at the pond we went to, that was just like little plants.
Yeah. That was
That's all natural.
dogweed. What was that stuff? Duckweed.
So this is like just toxic
Yeah.
algae.
So anyways, yeah. This stuff is like slimy. You know.
She said it looks like green paint.
Yeah. That's disturbing.
And what are they trying to do?
They're gonna so they're like shipping in it's like a giant vacuum from like Florida and California, and they're gonna like suck it all off. And
So-
the governor
so-
is all excited to put
So
it.
is this?
Well, like a giant vacuum. I mean, or a skimmer. Like, what are they gonna do?
She said it's like a giant vacuum, but I don't know.
Did she talk about what she like? How would, given a perfect scenario, how are you supposed to do it? Did she talk about that? No, maybe I'll email her.
You
See what she
should email
says.
her, 'cause I don't know.
Because I mean, I don't know how to clean that up.
She like talks
honestly.
and I'm like half listening.
Yeah, no, fair enough. It's your mom too, so it's different. I get it.
Yeah.
All right. So we're in Unit 2. So, Unit 2. Now I want you to get it. Put a number in your head here. So we're gonna move on here. And maybe write this down, and I'm gonna come around and see. How many species do you think have been identified at present time? How many species? No, don't say it.
What do
Write
you,
it.
species of what?
Everything. All species on Earth.
That's every single.
How many do you think have been identified
Like
and like categorized?
trees,
Like we've
plants?
proven this is a new species.
Like a
Yeah.
trees is
Insects,
so
plants, humans,
everything
animals.
living.
Uh-huh.
Oh my god, that's like.
So, all right, now
I don't know.
this is kind of hard. I probably from your perspective, you're probably like, this is such a random guess. You may be way off. That's fine. So there's two numbers actually. The first number is how many are actually cataloged like proof. We have found this species, and here's why. Okay, so that's the first number. Second number. Now I think you guys can follow my thinking here. So if that number is established, there must be more. Does that logic follow for you?
I mean,
Do you think we've found every single thing on the planet?
a lot more.
Okay, right. So your next number, take a guess as to what you think scientists estimate are the total number of species on the planet. So your number that you had, and then what do you think? Because I have two numbers that I found and read multiple times. These are the numbers that scientists generally agree on. And I just, if I was to do this pre-learning this, I probably would have estimated more. I would have overestimated.
I think I hit that.
Okay.
No, that's a lot.
That's the category. That's the catalog, and that's estimated. Okay. All right. Okay.
It's a fun story. So they showed me.
Figure out what's wrong and
Yeah,
what's
like
right.
jerseys, right?
All right.
All
All right. So, the number of species we have. So here, you know what? Let me tell you this. So in 2016, 18,000 new species were identified in 2016. So right now, currently scientists have named approximately 2 million species.
That's
So-
not what this package says.
So 2 million species.
That is not what that says.
I don't know if you're reading it right, but now most scientists estimate there's about 10 million on Earth. So I mean that's a lot. 10 million is a lot, right? So 2 million is what we have proven essentially, approximately. Around 2 million scientists have said, here's the name, here it is, we found it, this exists. And then they estimate around 10 million species on Earth. But I want to show you something
I feel
here.
like it's pretty hard for just 8 million species to hide.
Yeah.
Not when most are insects.
You
So-
think about like they're tiny
But
little
still,
bugs.
that's
And in the depths of the ocean is kind of uncharted territory.
There could be like 100 like on your like arm.
It's not even just like
Right.
million, it's like
Don't forget there's microbiome. What's that? What's a microbiome? Right, that's bacteria and fungi, right? Different species.
What's that one movie with the elephant and the that
Important, there you go.
like that?
Great example. There you go.
That means we
All
can watch
right.
the movie. Well, now we get to watch it.
All right. So look at this. Look at this picture here. I'll zoom in. This image. Okay. All right. In a case study here, randomly pick an extant animal species. Odds are that it would be a beetle. While there are 250,000 described species of plants, 12,000 described species of roundworms, 4,000 blah 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 blah. Okay. So if you look at this, percentages of described species, beetles are beating everybody else. So there's a lot of beetles. I was shocked with how many different types of wasps, 8%. So butterflies, plants, algae. Where are we?
Vertebrates.
And what are we on this? Right, does that make sense? Yeah, sure. It's a lot more. I mean, so you go to the pond and you get your nets and you search for little critters. You're not finding anything with spines, right? Did we? You didn't find a people. Any people?
Frogs. The frog joke, yeah.
Okay. So the point is, in these pieces of paper, it's invertebrates, right? So, anyways, I just thought this was kind of cool. Plants and algae even less than beetles. So beetles, and I forget what this goes on to say, and why there's so many different beetles, but there's a ton of different beetles. Anyways, yeah, I just wanted to show that to you. So if you, and in that article you have too, it talks a little bit about what's being affected the most at this point as well. But anyways, yeah, so there's your numbers. 2 million and estimated 10 million that are out there. All right. Let's see here. Why? Okay. Before I get into notes, why is it important to keep track of biodiversity and the number of species on the planet?
See how our ecosystem in the world are.
Right. So, and you can pick a specific habitat or specific ecosystem or specific area and keep track of that, right, over time to see how well it's doing in the health of that area. Very good. So again, what's the overriding theme with the first unit and now this unit? The more biodiversity,
Natural fear.
the better, right? Okay. Why is that again?
More parts.
More
So
parts?
If something goes wrong and it hurts one part, there's other things to take in.
Very good, Will. Good job. All right. Okay, moving on. Here we go. All right. So scientists named approximately 2 million. We just wrote that, so the total must be larger. let's write these terms down here. We can measure biodiversity in terms of species richness and evenness. So richness means the number of species in a given area, which we were just talking about. And then species evenness is the relative proportion of individuals within the different species in a given area. You just did some math to kind of prove this last week. What was it called? What was the math assignment due Friday? The one question there. Anyone remember?
The Shannon's?
Yeah, and Shannon's index. And the lower that number, less biodiversity. And I think the example, one of the examples was, I can't remember off the top of my head, but you had like 4 different species. One had 95 individuals, the other 3 only had 2. Does that sound right? In the example, so the point was that was definitely less diverse than the previous example because there was 25 in each, 25 individuals in each. And that's kind of what these 2 words are talking about. So make sure you get those definitions down. Knowing the species richness or evenness of an ecosystem gives environmental scientists a baseline they can use to determine how much an ecosystem has changed. So if we relate this to the carbon lab, what do you think? Was there a lot of, how would you describe the species richness and evenness down there?
A lot of oak.
A lot of oak. Was there a lot of anything else? Typically, you walk around this area, you're going to see a lot of oak, and this other tree is really maple, right? I don't know, I'm asking what you think. Do you think it was evenly distributed down there?
No.
I mean, I would say no, but you guys, I didn't look at every single tree like you guys. What's that?
I don't know what you're looking for. Because, like, those are where most.
Well, yeah, the next picture, I'm going to show you
adapted to this area.
picture here in a second. So anyways, yeah, species richness is the number of species in a given area, and evenness is the relative proportion. Let's see, what did I write here? I said some areas have a lot more of one type of species than another. Some areas have more even distribution. So areas with one species that dominates will have less biodiversity. So it's important to understand this is important to have it spread out fairly evenly. You don't want to, if you have a plot, like we did, let's say we had 90 oak trees and 10 maple trees. So that's what I'm talking about. That one dominates. That's not a good thing. So if you look at this picture here, so don't worry about trying to read, just look at the picture. So you have 4 different types of trees, and if you can't see this, it's on page, where am I? 155, I think, in your book, if you want to look into it. But you can probably see the trees here. So you have 4 different trees, A, B, C, D. Look at community 1, look at community 2. What do you guys notice?
There's more green trees in the right.
Well, they're all kind of green, I know what you mean. So there's less C over here. You have 1, 2, 3, 4 C here, 1, 2 C over here. How many B do we have over here?
2.
2. 1, 2. How many B do we have over here?
4.
1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, I guess I'm skipping these. Sorry. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right. And then what about D? What do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2. And then A. What do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then over here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So the point is, community 1 is 25, 25, 25, 25. That's what these numbers are of each tree, 25%. Over here, A is 70, B is 10, C is 10, D is 10. So which one would have more diversity?
First one.
Right. So you need to make sure you get that, all right, and understand that this is an example of species diversity based on the richness and evenness. So it says species richness and evenness are 2 different measures of species diversity. Although both communities contain the same number of species, right? They both have 4. Community 1 has more even distribution than community 2. That will be a healthier, more diverse environment. And think of the emerald ash borer. if these were all ash trees, and then that organism, that insect came into town here, all of this area would basically be barren. And that would be a bad thing for that habitat, that area, right? Because all those trees are basically the same, they are the same, and then you would only have a few of the other ones. So whereas this, it would be able to adapt or be more resilient to, and resistant, actually, both to that. If a, let's say, was the ash tree. So, that makes sense? Yes? Okay. All right, good. Let's see here. So we talked about species. What is species diversity? If you're going to give me a definition, what is species diversity? Who wants to? We already talked about it in the first unit. I just want to go through it real quick. What is species diversity? Caitlin, go ahead.
Caitlin or
Caitlin, you.
like gene diversity in a species,
Okay, so that's genetic diversity. I'm talking about, so I'll give you that one, then I'll call on someone else. So genetic diversity is different types of genes within the same species. Okay, genetic differences in the same species. Good, that's really important. What's species diversity? Carol. Do we have genetic diversity in this room?
Yeah.
Yes. Do we have species diversity? Why? Different species, right. So we're all the same species. I think so. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Some of us maybe not. Anyways, so species diversity is
Amount of species.
the number of different species. Very good. What's habitat diversity? Different types of habitats, right? Yeah. So yeah, I'm just reviewing the concept. All right. All right. Moving on. I'm gonna skip this stuff here a little bit here. We'll come back to that. All right. So before we get into bottleneck effect, I'm going to write a couple things on the board here. Just to hammer it home. More species diversity in a given area. How much time do I have here? All right, we'll stop after this. In a given area, the healthier that area will be more productive, more balanced. What else did I write here? Healthier and more productive, I wrote. So how are we? So how do humans affect this? How are humans affecting this? And I know you probably, some of you are probably like, we're saying the same things over and over. We are. But it's about slightly different topics, but it all relates to the same thing. It's really important you understand this. All right, we'll stop for 5 minutes or whatever. How about 3 minutes? What do you get in between classes?